Okay guys, today we're going to start talking about step 5, which is over here on the miter saw, and these are all of our cross cuts. So let's zoom in here and take a look, specifically talking about parts 1 and 2 on your box. So we're going to cross cut 1 inch square, we're going to cross cut our rabbet side to 7 5/8, and then we're going to cross cut our front to 16. I also want to talk about step 5 on your parts 3 and 4 here as well. It's very similar. We're going to cross cut 1 inch square, cross cut the miter side to 7 1/4 at 45 degrees, and then we're going to cross cut our back to 15 1/4. Okay, so that's what we're going to work on today. So there's 3 cuts on step 5. We're going to cross cut 1 inch square. So if this is my board here, what that means is we are just going to barely take any material off. So what that means is we're going to just barely take anything off. So when we cross cut 1 inch square, we're referring to this part of the board. So this is our end. So both ends here will be square by the time we're done. Actually, that's incorrect. One end will be square, the other end will be our scrap, and we'll just throw that away. So both ends of our 2 pieces here will be square. So our parts 1 and 2 are our front and our rabbet side. So when we're done here at step 5, we will have both of those parts at the exact size that we need, and they will be squared on all surfaces, all edges, and all ends, okay? So when we cross cut 1 inch square, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna barely take a little bit off, about that much, okay? And then this end of the board will be square. Right now it's a little out of square, just because we did not have a square edge when we were using the radial arm saw. For our rough cut. So we put that rough edge on the fence and we made a cut. So if this board, when it was on the fence, was angled even a little bit because it didn't have a straight edge, well then when the blade cuts it straight, it's still not going to be straight because the board wasn't straight. Okay, so that's why we still have to just take a little bit off to make sure this board is straight across and 90 degrees from the edge. Okay, once we've done that, we're going to measure what our plans call for on our rabbet side, which is 7 5/8. We will make a small mark like this, okay, at our 7 5/8, and we will cut it so that the shadow or the blade is on the opposite side of our measurement. So if our 7 5/8 spans this entire section here, we don't want to put the blade on this side of the line because we will be taking off part of that 7 5/8. Okay, so then we're left with the rest of this board here. So we need to get 16 inches out of that. So when we made this cut right here, now this part of the board this end of the board here would be square. We'll measure 16 inches from there, mark it like that, and cut it here on this side of the line again. And then this part right here will all be scrap, and we will have our front and our rabbet side squared on both ends, okay? So now that I've kind of walked you through it, verbally how we're going to do it, I'm going to walk you through it and actually do the cuts, okay? So we're using the miter saw again for our straight square cross cuts. So our miter saw has a light, okay? If you're in Mr. Kennedy's class, he has the exact same miter saw. So you turn your light on, and if it's in the down lock position like this, you want to push down on the handle, and this little pin right here, pull that out, and then it unlocks it, okay? Now we can set our board up here and get ready for our first cross cut, which is squaring that 1 in. So as I bring this board down here, we can see that shadow. You can see the shadow there. I'm going to just bring that shadow so it's just barely cutting anything off. As long as the blade touches all the way down, we're good. Okay, notice where my hand is over here. So if I take this board out, my hand would be right on top of the table. Okay, there's no table right here, so don't push down here. That will cause your board to lift up when you cut, and that causes a kickback. Okay, so make sure where you are pushing down on the board, all of your fingers are right there on that table. Okay, so now we have a square end here. So now I'm going to measure our 7 5/8. Okay, so remember when we make a mark on a board, it's a very small mark. We don't want to mark all the way across the board because there's no way to be accurate. If you really wanted to mark all the way across the board, you could do that. It's not necessary, and it's kind of a waste of time, but if you wanted to, you could use a tri-square and do it like this so that the edge is up against the tri-square handle, and then you put the blade of the ruler on the surface so that you get a perfect straight line. Okay, but again, that's not necessary, especially since we have this light that casts that shadow. Okay, so we are going to put that shadow so that it is just on this side of the line. So I'm keeping all of this because this is my 7 5/8. Again, keep your hand where the table is. Okay, so now that I've cut this piece, if I haven't done so already, I'm going to write the name of the part on the surface so that I know what part I'm working with later on. Alright, so now this end is still square because I just made a cut here. So I'm going to measure my 16 inches. And since I have this piece here already, I'm going to go ahead and write front on it because I'm only going to cut off this little bit. Now, if I was to continue working my way down here and make this cut, you can see that I have very little material to hold on to. So make sure you're always holding on to the long side. So I'm just going to spin it around like that and make my cut. Now, before I do that, I want to show you something with this tri-square. Okay, so if we look here, we can see that the tri-square fits perfectly on that end and edge and making a 90-degree angle. If we flip it over, this is the unsquared edge. If we look right here, we can see a gap between the ruler and the end of the board. But over on the other side, over here, it's touching. So that shows us that that is not 90 degrees, okay? If you go to put that on your project, these two pieces are going together. Okay, this, you're going to have a gap like this. Okay, so it'll be touching at the bottom, but it won't be touching at the top. So we want that to sit nice and flat on there, so we need to cut that end off. Especially important with this cut that we keep that blade all the way down before lifting it up, because we have this small cutoff piece, and if you lift that blade up and it catches it with those teeth, it's going to send this as a projectile. Okay. Now we've completed step 5 for parts 1 and 2. I'm going to go get my piece for my parts 3 and 4, and we can go through those as well. Okay, so this is my rough cut piece that's 24 and a half. This is going to be my parts 3 and 4. So we're going to go through step 5 for this part as well. This is the one where we need to cut a 45-degree miter to separate our miter side and our back. Okay, so just to kind of recap, the 3 cuts you're making is to square one end. So when we just take a little bit off, measure 7 1/4, cut that at 45 degrees. Okay, so that's going to be cut like this. And then we will have a 45-degree angle on that piece as well as the other piece. Okay, that other piece is going to be our back, so we're going to measure from that miter over 15 1/4, and then that will be a straight cut. By doing that, these two pieces are going to go together really well because they are opposite angles. Okay, they are cut from the same cut, so they should match up perfect when you go to put them back together. Okay, so this is going to be where I square one end. So I don't need to make a mark on there. Now with those last ones, I made a mark just to show you how much I was cutting off with a visual aid there. But this, I'm just gonna line the shadow up with the edge of the board there. And I have my hand over here where the table is, and I'm gonna cut straight across. Okay, so I didn't even really cut anything off. This is my cut off piece here. So I cut paper off of there. Okay. All right, now from that square end, I'm going to measure my 7 1/4. And that mark is going to be the longest point, the sharp point of the miter. So in order to do this, I'm going to look to the back of the saw here. I have this knob. I am going to loosen this knob. Okay. And before I even rotate the saw over, I'm going to adjust this fence here. When I rotate the saw over, it would make contact with the fence and either cut through, or it would just bind up so much that it wouldn't even allow me to come down into the cut. I know that ahead of time, so I'm going to loosen my knob back here, slide my fence all the way out of the way. It hangs down, so I'm going to push down to make sure it's flat before I tighten it back up. Now I'm going to rotate the saw over to 45 degrees and reach back here and lock it back down. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Okay, so this is my mark right here. So my line is going to be just on the other side of it, just as if I was cutting it straight across. So I'm still going to hold in that same spot, and this is going to be a harder cut for the saw to make. You're cutting through a thicker material because you're cutting at an angle, and it's harder to cut the grain that way. So you're going to have to apply a little bit more pressure. When you get started, you want to make sure your feet are solid and you're comfortable in the position you're cutting in. Again, very important that we let that stop before we bring it up. We don't want to have a double cut, meaning it cuts again on the way up, because that will mess up how good your miter is. So these two pieces now should fit together, and they do, like a picture frame. Okay, so this is my mitered side. That. And now I have this long piece here with a 45 on this end, so I'm going to measure from this sharp point over to 15 1/4. Now this is going to be a straight cut, so that's also the benefit of making that miter cut to cut these apart, is now I only have to make one miter cut. So it's kind of a difficult cut to make. Your hands are kind of in an awkward position, and this way you only have to do that one time. Again, hold on to the long side, so you're holding on to the side that has the miter on it. And you're going to put the blade on the right side of the line now. Okay, and I have a little bit extra left over. I actually rough cut my piece more than 24 1/2, so you will not actually have this much left over, but it's okay. This is still too small to do anything with, so we're going to make that scrap. Okay, so I'm going to label this piece back. And now all 4 of my walls are completed. So my back, my miter side, my front, and my rabbet side. Okay, so now I have kind of a structure of a box. My project is starting to look like something now. So while I have it in this position, this is where I'm going to go ahead and label all of my parts, because my next step is either to drill the holes or to make my rabbet on this end of my front right here. Okay, that is step 5.